Hello, welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am my host. I am my host. How about that for an intro? I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings. Joining me today is Josh Nason. Josh is, of course, of Wrestling Observer Newsletter, Figure4Online.com. He is the host of Josh Nason's Punch Out, which you can find on the F4WWON website in the podcast feed section. He's my neighbor to the north. He's a native of Western Maine. Josh, how are you doing today?
Very good, Jesse. I'm glad to finally be on your show after you've been on my show gracefully so many times. And I should wish you a good hello, Gullo.
Hello, Gullo.
Yes.
See, Brandon's dropping the ball on Hello, Gullo, because what really needs to hammer it home is like some elevator music in the background while Gullo tells us a story of his life, because people don't always get this on WrestleNomics, but Gullo has some hilarious stories from his life that he usually tells us either before or after we record, and I really feel like that should be shared with the world.
He doesn't talk a lot on that show. He just kind of sitting there with a bow tie and kind of run the ship and all that stuff. Yeah, he doesn't really contribute that much.
Gullo does a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I'm not gonna tell you he doesn't contribute, and part of that is strategic. It's hard to have three people talking at once on a podcast.
I see.
And Gullo does a lot of kind of management stuff like that, like keeps control of the timestamps. He runs the chat room. He tells us when comments are happening, reads things, that kind of stuff is more of his role. Since I've been on the show, of course, we're feuding in storyline.
That's
but
true.
So do you know the origin of the Hello Gullo? I don't know. We were going to start with a Chris Gullo conversation.
This is good. It helps the storyline along. I don't. I am sure I've heard it, but I actually do not.
So Gullo's uncle owns a landscape,
a hardware store.
Yeah, it's like a guarded. It's like a guarded center.
Yes.
And they have regional ads in the Buffalo area where they say like, say hello to Gullo's. And like it's a commercial for it. And I guess they were airing it during Dynamite in the Buffalo area. So Brandon picked it up, and that's kind of how it started. But that is the origin of it for people who are not aware, or certainly not getting Buffalo, New York area cable feeds, which is where that commercial comes from. It's a very regional advertisement, but we all have our famous regional advertisements.
No, we certainly do.
Yes, of course, in New England we have many. I heard, speaking of New England advertising news, you know what? I got an email the other day that they're reworking the Water Country jingle. Are you familiar with the Water Country jingle?
I know I've heard it, but it is not coming to mind. Are you going to sing it for me right now?
Well, it's like, it's when the sun is blazing and the summer is hot. Water Country is a very cool spot. That's how it goes.
Yeah. Are you in a band?
No, I'm not. I'm musically gifted, despite my incredible singing of the Water Country theme song. Anyway, they're reworking it, and I was like, who was asking for a reworking of the Water Country jingle? It is iconic. Okay, this is terrible audio for anyone outside of the 95 Beltway. But the reason I had you on the show today, Josh, is because I wanted to talk about WWE in a positive light. And obviously there's no way to look at WWE's business metrics without being extremely positive. If we look over the past year, pretty much across the board, they are up substantially from where they were a year ago. Look at live attendance is through the roof. I mean, I remember where WWE was probably having maybe like 4 or 5 Raw or SmackDown tapings per year that would get more than 10,000 fans in attendance. And now it's like, if they don't get 10,000 fans in attendance, it's like a down house. The television ratings have gone way up, especially in the key demo. It wasn't that long ago where, WWE was in like the 0.40 range for Raw. And now we see them right around, 0.55, sometimes stretching as high as like 0.6, 0.7. We've seen that number. We've really seen their business just increase across the board over the last year. The only thing I think they're down in is YouTube views, which is kind of shocking, but I'm sure that has more to do with like videos being pulled and certain other metrics going on YouTube's end, because everything else is way, way up. And I wanted to kind of explore the multitude of reasons why we think that is. I think it's not an easy explanation, because like anything in an industry that's this diverse and this wide, there are a lot of factors in play. But I'll start with this, Josh. Just if I were to come up to you on the street and ask you, "Hey, I heard WWE's doing a lot better business wise. Why is that?" How would you answer that question?
Because they have a PreMajor Storyline that's run for a long time that is got a lot of legs to it, a lot of tentacles to it, and has been well told, and one that is seems cool, and it's very accessible. It doesn't involve really old people, so to speak, uncool people, to even Paul Heyman, even though he's at an advanced age, so to speak, not in the key demo, I would assume. He's kind of he's playing a part in this, but it just involves like really kind of like, yeah, it's a cool angle. And I think that's a big thing, especially when it comes to the elusive quote unquote casual fan that everyone's trying to get. I think part of that is this angle is something that if you're a wrestling fan and you're watching with somebody else, or they happen to come up in a conversation, someone's like, "Oh, what is this? I saw Roman Reigns was on this, or whatever, or Uso or Usi or something along those lines." If someone was kind of outside our bubble was to bring it up, you wouldn't be embarrassed to talk about it. And I think that's a thing where it's very accessible. It has the soap opera elements, it has the physical elements, and it has these different elements that have not made it feel stale, which is unlike a lot of WWE angles throughout the period where fans just start getting shaved off, disengaged, disenchanted with Vince McMahon booking. I would say that's the top reason, is that it has a hot thing. And after a while, people just kind of get hooked onto it. And then they find other things, kind of like back in the Attitude Era when it was the Steve Austin run. And that was kind of your meat for the dinner. And then people are like, "Oh, what's this side dish over here? What's this over here?" And they're willing to check other things out, and they find certain hooks that they like, and that becomes cool too. And it's just kind of the rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that's translated. We'll talk about, attendance, I'm sure, and things like that. But they have really been smart about where they're taking their monthly pay-per-views / PLEs to different locales in front of hot crowds that make it seem like it's a place to be and a place to be seen, as we used to say back when I used to work in pro sports. It's an event. People are jumping out of their seats. The first one that comes to mind is Puerto Rico. You look at the international markets, it looks cool, and that translates over. Whereas, a lot of Raws throughout the years and SmackDowns as well, people are just kind of like, I would say sitting on their hands, but basically just sitting and watching the show. And when they get to these big moments, these big punctuating moments, the emotion of the fans, you can feel it at home, and you feel it, and then it makes it feel like this is something that's kind of cool to be part of. So that'd be what I would start with.
Mm-hmm. So you're really big on the bloodline angle, really kind of driving this growth.
Yes.
What's interesting to me is that the bloodline angle has been going on for years. We can go back 2 or 3 years and you could find, the Usos feuding with Roman Reigns. But it wasn't really until this past, really this past year, the past 365 days, where I would say like it really took off in terms of, I think people were into it within the established WWE fan base that was watching week to week anyway. Um, but and people were into kind of Roman's heel turn right from the get-go. But it really wasn't until about a year ago where I felt like it really turned into like a historically memorable angle, in the sense of this will be an angle that I don't want to say like it's the greatest angle of all time, or all that's compare it to the NWO and stuff like that. But at the same time, I do think in like 10 or 15 years, we'll be remembering, oh, the bloodline angle as like this historically important angle. But it took like a couple years for it to kind of get that way, which is really interesting. I don't think we've really seen anything like that in pro wrestling. If you wanted to go back and compare, it's like the NWO. Like the NWO starts off really hot. It stays hot for a long time in wrestling terms, but eventually cools off. I mean, by the time the NWO had been done and beaten to death as an angle, the bloodline angle was really taking off, 2.5 years into it, which I find kind of fascinating.
Yeah. So there's a few things with that. One, there's been multi-year angles run before, but TV was a lot different. I think the famous one, obviously, the Hogan Savage from WrestleMania 4 through WrestleMania 5. I mean, that was year long, but there wasn't hours and hours of TV to fill. So in this era, I would agree with you that these long storylines, which Vince McMahon has been kind of adverse to throughout the years, and especially during I would say the decline in interest in the company before this run. So yeah, I mean, it's the thing that really stands out, as you were talking about that, is think about some of these angles that we've seen in WWE through the past, few years. Say before this, from like, I don't know, 2017 through 2020, 2017 through 2020, right? Or 2015, whatever you want to say there. What angles do you remember that have been kind of top, quote unquote, top angles that have left everyone elevated afterward? I can't think of that many. I'm sure there may be one or two, maybe, but ones that like this, where Roman Reigns, the centerpiece, is coming off bigger as a result of this to me. Both Usos as a team, and then also individually, especially Jay, I think, is going to be the one that really benefits the most. I think that's clear. He comes off as a bigger star. Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, I think those guys, their profiles have increased through this as well. And even things like, with Cody Rhodes, as much as I disliked him not winning the title, I think that run and I think the alliance kind of leading into some of these shows with Cody and Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, I love seeing that, because that reminds me again when I was growing up, where baby faces aligned. It was baby faces versus heels.
Baby faces have friends, an important
right,
thing that is
right.
elusive from WWE during certain periods of time.
And they don't like AEW, I think, tends to overdo it, where every single person, no matter where they are, needs a friend or multiple friends. And I think that waters it down. When WWE, you don't see that. And we hadn't seen that in really like forever, like a real, like, top guys getting together and being like, this is not good. And we're going to fend off these heels, right? Just that kind of guttural feeling of where we came from, or at least I came from as a wrestling fan. So I feel like everyone is just elevated through this. And it's not just a case of I think of all like the big Brock Lesnar matches. I don't, I'm just using an example. I don't feel like out of any of these, like, there's been guys that have come out of being like, this person feels bigger as a result. It was always just kind of like, Brock kills someone and we move on, and that's it, and on to the next. And it's just kind of like, meh, that's one of the things I think really stands out, is that other people feel bigger. So that when they go to other angles, they go to Raw, so on and so forth, they kind of bring that momentum with them. That's something we just really haven't, to me, we haven't really seen it felt like guttural felt in a long time.
I think you touched on something really important there, which is I think WWE's done a much better job in the last year or two of presenting and booking baby faces in general. I think that's something that they've really struggled with over like the last 10 years. And
Yeah.
I do think, especially with the way, since they brought back Cody, which would be, WrestleMania last year, I think the way Sami Zayn kind of took off, and I think you can look at the way the Usos are presented now, that baby faces are being presented in a stronger way. It's not all heat on the baby face, heat on the baby face, heat on the baby face. You mentioned like baby faces have friends, which was often a problem in WWE, which is the heels all had a bunch of friends and the baby faces were losers that had no one that wanted to help them. So they kept getting beaten up by the army of heels each time. I think that, especially with a wrestler like Cody, and I would say the Usos are close to this as well. I just think their promos are a lot better in coming across as more natural. That probably has to do with maybe less Vince involvement, which we'll get to, and I think is like the major factor in WWE's improvement over the last year. But I just think in general, like, baby faces come across as better. And I think that plays a role in, even though Roman Reigns has held the title for a million years and he's not really putting people over, people are still feel elevated when they interact with him because they come across as organically good performers and people that the fans want to get behind, in a way that was kind of elusive to WWE before.
Yeah. I think I know you are a big Ken Burns documentary watcher now, as a subscriber to PBS after they knocked on your door. PBS Passport member. But
Yes, I'm
do
a
you watch
PBS
other?
passport holder
That's
proud New Hampshire native, by the way, Ken Burns.
that's right. That's right. Do you watch regular, scripted TV shows? You a regular TV watcher?
I don't watch a ton of scripted television, but I do watch, I probably watch like one show at a time.
Okay.
That makes
So
sense.
what are you watching right now, or what's the one that comes to mind
I
recently?
just finished The Bear.
Great. So The Bear, the perfect
Yes.
example. Outstanding show, both seasons. Great. FX, Hulu, wherever you want to watch it. I would highly recommend. When you watch those shows, do you find that you have rooting interest for certain characters on those shows? On
Yes.
that show?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, right? And other shows you've watched throughout the years, probably very similar, where you have a kid, there's a connection, an emotional connection, a feel where you're like, I want this person to do good. Like when Marcus went to, I believe it was Amsterdam, or not
He
Amsterdam, but
went
he
to
went
Copenhagen. I was about to
Cope.
I was about to bring it up. I was like, yes, in that episode, I was rooting for Marcus. I was worried that something bad was going to happen for him, but I was like,
Right.
when it ended, I had a big sigh of relief. I said, this was such a pleasant episode.
Exactly. And that's
Spoilers on The Bear, by the
way. Right. Not major ones, but it's good. But that's the whole, people, may connect to Sydney or to Carmi or Carmi's brother, his cousin. And like, the point is that no matter any of these shows, I watch a lot of scripted TV have throughout the years. And the thing makes a good show, a big thing that makes a good show versus a bad show is your connection to the characters and whether, frankly, you give a shit about what they're doing, what their lives are like, what they're like. Are you invested in the story? And that's one of the things that, talking about baby faces that again, that they've really kind of got back to. You can see it with some of the, the Santos Escobar, Rey Mysterio stuff. And, the Rey Mysterio, the ultimate babyface going against the dastardly son, Dominic Mysterio. That was a nice kind of another thing as I think is kind of elevated up to that. When you have so much darkness, you have to have the light. You think of any type of science fiction, but like pop culture movie, like your Star Wars, all your Marvel shows, things like that. There's good going against evil, so you most people root for the good. They want to see the bad guys get theirs and so on. Or if you're seeing again, Marcus trying to figure out how to cook and things like that, you want to have a rooting interest, and that's where with the whole babyface thing that WWE has finally kind of come back around on. That was missing for so long was like, I just don't want to root for these people because they're weak baby faces. They're just not like, they don't give you that instant, non-smooth fit. This is why you should be rooting for me. It's like Cody's a natural baby face, and having him in, you immediately like, I'm with this guy. I like this stuff. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn through this bloodline feud, the same thing. People like that. You like to like them, and that's a good thing because it creates that balance and it creates that kind of that interest, that hook that they've been just missing for so long.
And
yeah, that's another thing.
Historically, WWE has been a babyface territory. Like that is how the company look at their most successful periods and wrestlers. You can go back to you can go even before Bruno Sammartino to like Argentina Rocca and stuff, people like that. But look at Bruno Sammartino, look at Bob Backlund, look at Hulk Hogan, look at Bret Hart, look at Steve Austin. If we go back to the Attitude Era, this was always like a big notable thing to me. Especially, when they were so obsessed with just heat every week, was that like if you were to watch a Raw in 1998, the general plot of Raw is Steve Austin is the popular babyface. Vince McMahon organized some kind of scheme or plots to negatively impact Steve Austin. Maybe he wanted to beat him for the title. Maybe he wanted to just beat him up. But the end of pretty much every episode was Steve Austin figures it out and gives Vince McMahon a Stone Cold Stunner. That's not sometimes, every once in a while, McMahon would end up victorious for the week. But for the most part, every episode was built around, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy. The bad guy, puts pressure on the good guy, but the good guy overcomes the end and everyone goes home happy. And that was kind of like the standard for WWE's most successful period of time. It wasn't until only the last decade or so where it became a lot more like, the babyface is going to finally get a big win after 9 months of struggle, which there's some logic to the sense of, we're going to beat the babyface, beat the babyface, beat the babyface, beat the babyface, and then eventually they're going to get a big win, which is kind of what happened to Daniel Bryan. That was like kind of the method that ended up happening for him. And there's a method to that in the sense of, that will make fans want it so bad. We won't deliver. And then when we finally deliver, it will be huge. But realistically, what happens is it becomes very hard as a babyface to maintain that kind of momentum when you're getting your ass kicked each week. What makes it easier is if you're coming out on top and being protected in the booking. And I think WWE has done a much better job protecting those baby faces in their booking in a week-to-week basis. So there's more of a rewarding factor, even though Roman Reigns has been champion the entire time. And I do think that the Roman Reigns aspect is interesting because I also think Roman Reigns is, it's kind of varied depending on who he's wrestling. But like Roman Reigns is obviously the biggest heel in the company, but he's also kind of the biggest babyface too. He's the most popular wrestler, which is more of like it's more of a role that exists in modern wrestling that maybe didn't exist in the past, where fans are not as aligned to like the morality of their wrestlers. They don't know if it's good, or they don't really side with who's good or who's evil. They go side with who's interesting. And Roman has been the most interesting wrestler for most WWE fans. Certainly the way he's presented. He comes across as like the most complex character in a lot of ways. He's had the entire company built around him for the past decade. And so fans are also, he's over with the fans kind of in the way that a babyface is, even while he is being presented as a heel.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He's I think you nailed it when you said interesting. He's interesting, right? Even in this kind of tweener role that he's in, he's cool. He's interesting. He's worth paying attention to because there's now levels and layers to the character, understand more of the backstory, and just he is far more interesting than when they were trying to make him John Cena 2.0 and be like, okay, we're just going to hand the baton to somebody else and we're going to force this until people are like just going to accept it. Now they naturally accept it.
And John Cena's character was not interesting. Like
after a while, he was not right.
It
just became like the same old thing. And even like, I was always big, like, change up the look from time to time, try something different. And that was, the big call forever. And this was, again, during kind of a real big, to me, a creative lull with WWE was everyone's wanted him to be heel, right? They wanted that satisfaction of just seeing the good guy turn just once because it would make him more interesting. I think ultimately that word is the most important one when it comes to a Reigns, or in Austin was interesting. The Rock was interesting. There was even guys like Mick Foley. There was something there which like, oh, this is different. And with Reigns, it just wasn't different. It felt like this is the guy we're going to give you, like it or not. And
I think with Cena, like Cena's character wasn't interesting, but Cena like has like a special level of charisma and personality that Roman just never had. Roman needed to be presented in a different way to, I think, harness his talent, which happened when he turned heel and, developed the tribal chief character and the kind of aesthetic that goes along with that. He couldn't just be like John Cena, hey, fans, everyone have a good time tonight, because Cena is really like uniquely talented in that way. He can go out and cut a 15-minute promo in front of a hostile crowd when he's supposed to be babyface, and if not turn the crowd, at least get them to stop taunting him and to be invested in what he's going to say. And they try to shoehorn Roman Reigns into that role, but Reigns had different skills. He didn't have the skill set for the Cena role, and I think that's part of the reason he was struggled to get over for so long as a top babyface. It wasn't until he found a more fitting role for what he could be good at where things really took off, and now you can see where he is now.
I would love at someday a long feature. I don't know if it's book worthy, but this whole a real look inside this whole storyline, like where it was created, how much Paul Heyman had influence on it, who was really the main drivers behind the creative, were there turns that they took where they're like, we don't know, where there ones are like, we didn't decide to take that maybe they would like to try again. Kind of where I'd love this, a long form podcast series, not produced by WWE, which I don't think we'll ever get, but just who are kind of the parents of this, and who really kind of ushered this kid of a storyline, so to speak, storyline along to being a full grown adult. I'm fascinated by this guy. I think by assumption, well, Heyman has to be involved. Heyman has to be involved. I'm sure he is, but I'm sure there's other creative forces in line. I'd love to know what ideas has Roman come up with? There's stuff that the Usos came up with, or how involved was Paul Levesque? Was McMahon involved to that extent? Because this does not feel like a real McMahon storyline, because it's actually good, And I just would love to get an understanding of the contributors to all this along the way, and who kind of really just added gasoline to this fire and made it even better, and pitfalls they avoid along the way.
Josh, if the NWO has taught us anything, for the next 20 or 30 years, there'll be a million people taking credit for it. Whether or not they were involved or not. It's like how I think there's like 100 different people that have claimed that they came up with the idea of Bill Goldberg's winning streak.
No, that's true. Right.
I don't know if we'll ever get a straight answer on kind of the creative process. I gotta put the disclaimer out here. I don't like the Bloodline storyline. I think it's really boring, and it's been lasting for way too long. And I actually don't think that there's been a lot of creative effort put into it, given that it's been on weekly TV for 3 straight years. It feels like they've been telling basically the same story for the entire time, with some brief blips, particularly when Sami Zayn was getting over, and attention kind of shifted more towards him, which I think made it more interesting. But I'm being objective here, and obviously the storyline is hugely successful, and so I'm kind of separating my personal opinion on the storyline, which I am not a particularly huge fan of, and I actually think its influence has been damaging to pro wrestling to an extent as far as what I like to see, but clearly it's successful. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast. And I wanted to do it with you, Josh, because I knew you were a fan of it. And I didn't want to just turn this into I grumble about the Bloodline storyline, because that's not really what I find interesting. I find interesting is kind of what has happened in WWE over the last year.
Yeah. No, I can completely see that. And I think that's a good thing about this industry, and the art that it is possible for people to not agree and not be like, oh, this is so terrible, you're a shill for this and blah blah blah. It's like, this is the whole thing is, and when you talk to indie promoters and the really good ones, they are always like, we want to present a smorgasbord of different stuff, a variety of different stuff, a buffet, where people that don't like this don't have to wait long, because we'll have this coming up or this coming up, and it's a variance, it's palate cleansers, it's different things. And it's okay. It's okay. And it's okay if people don't like women wrestling. It's okay if people don't like blood and guts type stuff. It's okay if they don't like the bloodline. There's other things for them where they're like, as long as it's not completely insulting their intelligence, or it's just like, oh, this is so awful. There's something else that they can find. And I think with, one of the things with WWE is it feels like there is a lot of kind of different things. And, granted, this isn't, they aren't A+ every single week. Raw is still 3 hours. I'm sure, I'm not a regular Raw watcher every single week. But just kind of hearing from people I respect and know, it's back to wow, this show is really boring. It's a slog to get through it. It's not entertainment. But you look at the numbers are still strong, and SmackDown seems to be the one that is continuing to power through. And we'll see how this turns. I mean, WWE could, in Nick Khan and crew, could have not landed in a better spot if they dream this up. The fact that there's a writer strike.
Oh, the writer strike.
Yeah, there's a writer strike, so they're bulletproof there, because with a writer strike and the producer and the actor strike, TV is going to be affected for at least probably the next year, depending on when this gets done, because it's not like all of a sudden production picks up the next day, everyone's just outside and ready to go in the sets. All the stuff is in development. There's just a whole thing. WWE just keeps on going.
Do you mean to tell me that WWE is not a union shop?
Yeah, I guess not. It's weird how that works. Yeah, right.
Seth Rollins sympathies are with the strikers, but he's glad he's not a union.
Yeah. Well, that is such a weird take, but I like the thing.
Look, no one licks those boots better than Seth Rollins.
The thing I still don't understand why WWE is not done. I do, but I don't, is why are they still not covering and taking care of travel for talent, lodging, travel, like it is. you've talked to, and I remember Bailey
Yeah,
briefly brought this up, and it's probably like electroshocked when she got back. But like for a company that makes this much money is going to make probably, a lot more in this next round of deals. This is like a no brainer just to take care of your talent and say you don't have to do this anymore because you are professional freaking entertainers. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. And
oh,
people outside the industry hear this think it is ludicrous. Do you think that Brad Pitt is going to go on set? They're going to make him drive from place to place if there's different locations, or like professional athletes, oh, you got to find your way here. This is kind of part of like the team atmosphere is you don't, the company takes more control over it because they can ensure people are going to get there and they have more control over it. And again, they have leverage in terms of flight discounts and travel. It's like there's a way to do it, and to have the town be like, it's up to you. It's such a bad tradition. It's such a
yeah.
bad look. It's 2023. It's time to like move past this and
Well,
take care of your
not
people.
even being a successful entertainer, like anyone that's ever had to travel for work, for the most part, your
Yeah.
company will either arrange it or at least reimburse you for it. I when I have to travel for work, like I have to drive somewhere to cover something. Every month I fill out an expense report that tells they pay me, they reimburse my gas because and I work for a bad company. Doesn't treat its employees particularly well. Um, but yeah, I know that's one of those things that comes across as being absurd. But to get back on topic a little bit, I wanted to uh mention, like, well, in terms of like my personal opinion on it, like to me it comes down to just being like honest and being like fair in my analysis. And nothing is more annoying to me when like people argue about, like, I like AEW and I like AEW style. And it's annoying to me where people that don't like AEW style will make an argument that like AEW style isn't working, that no one wants to tune in and watch this stuff. There's too many lucha guys flying around, this kind of thing, whatever people's personal preferences are for wrestling. And they allow that to put them into a position where they're making absurd, factually untrue arguments about the financial success of something. Um, and so like if I'm going to be fair analysis, I can say I don't really like the Bloodline Angle, but clearly it's doing well for business. Clearly it's a huge success, and clearly while it does not align with my personal tastes, it has really struck a chord in WWE's entire creative over the last year, has really struck a chord with the WWE fan base, and has gotten a lot more of their fans to become weekly watchers of their programming, and to pay for tickets. And it'd be foolish and untruthful to say the bloodline stinks, it's a terrible angle, that they should end it, they should break it up, because they shouldn't, because it's clearly working for them. And that's just part about being fair and honest. And I also, at the same time, some people will just say, oh, because it's doing business well, that means it's good, which those are two separate things. I can give my own opinion on something while also acknowledging the broader business implications of it. I guess it's sometimes a line people struggle to walk, but I think it's part of being in this space and being able to to separate your personal tastes with like business analysis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. I think some of the, some of the business metrics and, looking back at the financials that were released on Wednesday, as we record this on Thursday, one of the things that stands out, obviously, to me is the live event attendance, and obviously the revenue is up, but a big thing about revenue is people are like, oh, the revenue's up. And, AEW, they talk about that, and the gate's so much higher than a year ago. That's because ticket prices are higher. That's like a big reason for it. But the actual attendance itself, look at WWE compared year over year. They held 6 more events this last quarter than the year over year before. And it was, 55 domestic, 4 international, and their domestic attendance was approximately, they had 53 ticket events. They had less people, or less shows. Average domestic attendance was just under 10,000, 9,900. Compared to the year before, they had 6 less events, and it was around 6,800. So grand, there are less events, so that average can rise. But still, I mean, you look at some of these. I think, was it Survivor Series that went on sale in Orlando? I think it was, and that automatically sold out. Strong numbers. You look at with WrestleTix for versus Raws and SmackDowns. I mean, they're doing well. So that indicates, for Raw and SmackDown and the PLEs, people are really interested. And also that's also translating over to NXT when they've seen a nice renaissance with having more main roster talent down. Whether that kind of muddies what they're supposed to be, I don't think WWE cares right now, but people are definitely there. Even if they're not into the Bloodline story, they're going to these shows and they're interested in something on the show in that buffet that they're like, I gotta go see this live. And that's that I look at those numbers and it's like that's a big benefit, and that's something showing that people are going. And I was thinking that the other day, at some point this popularity is going to start decreasing. I mean, everything has an apex and everything has a decline. I don't know when the decline is going to happen. They're obviously pretty strong now, but I'm curious how they manage that decline if it comes in a couple of years, where we're at that point in the wrestling world and the world in general. But at some point, they are going to start coming down. That's just how kind of these things work.
Yeah, and I think I think the big thing for me, if I were to answer the original question, which is why is WWE so much more popular over the past year, what I think the thing that I come down to is, Vince McMahon, a year ago, Vince McMahon resigns, steps down from all his capacities in WWE. It's publicly announced, it's publicly acknowledged. Triple H is there cutting a promo on an episode of Raw. It is Triple H is now the creative head of WWE. Vince McMahon is retired. That's the public line. That's the perception of everyone, that Vince McMahon is no longer involved with the company. And that was the case for several months. And then, Vince worked his way back into the company and now he's more powerful than ever. But formally, at least, still Triple H is in charge of the creative process. And I think that is a huge reason why this company is doing so much better from a business perspective. And the reason they're doing so much better from a business perspective is not necessarily that Triple H is better at creative than Vince McMahon, because I think he is. But I think the big thing is just the optimism that comes with Vince McMahon is no longer being in charge and Triple H is in charge. And the fans generally like Triple H. He had the reputation from NXT. They think Triple H can do a good job. And so immediately you had a lot more optimism for the product. You had a lot more people who had maybe become disillusioned with WWE getting back into the product, saying, oh, it's going to be different now. I'm going to check it out. Even though I think the product isn't that much different, there are obviously some significant changes, like we discussed, like the babyfaces being presented better. But the product's not like radically different than it was, a few years ago. But I think the idea that Triple H is in charge, fans feel good about the product. Fans feel like if they get invested in somebody, the company is going to reward them by paying it off. They've given them enough things like the Bloodline Angle, like Sami Zayn getting over, like the way that Cody has been presented, that they are now kind of rallying behind other new people. I think LA Knight is a significant one, in that people are getting organically over, which used to happen all the time about 10 to 12 years ago. I'm sure you'll remember Zack Ryder. People remember when like Dolph Ziggler was really over. Even you can go back and look at like when Rob Van Dam got really over in the mid 2000s. Edge kind of in the same way, going back even further. WWE always had these mid-carders kind of getting organically over and then eventually pushed at a higher level. But at some points, the company really they ended up burning enough bridges there. They ended up pushing Zack Ryder off of the stage in a wheelchair, and they ended beating Dolph Ziggler unceremoniously, and all these other things that happened to people that started to get organically over. Fans lost that enthusiasm, lost that optimism, lost that investment in members of the roster, and they turned into a really apathetic crowd. And I think it's a huge difference now that the crowd is so much more energized and they're behind a bunch of different people on the roster. Yeah, the Bloodline and Roman Reigns and the Usos and people like Cody are really over, but other people are starting to get really over too and getting big reactions from the crowd. And I think a lot of that comes from the fan base feels like wrestling is going to be in good hands. And they had just lost that by when Vince was in charge, and you can't blame them. Vince, there were so many dropped angles, momentum opportunities to push someone new where they failed. Pushing Roman above everyone else as a stale babyface for year after year after year. All of that just led to fans, tuning out of the product, literally, but also just, even if they were going to the shows, not making a ton of noise. And I think that's totally changed with Triple H in this position that he's in now. Even if Vince is meddling backstage, even if Vince is still ripping up scripts, even if Vince is, still making key creative decisions and calls, the fan base feels like the company is in much better hands with Triple H, as the formal head of creative. And I think that has led to a lot more positivity, which in turn has led to a lot more investment, which in turn leads to a lot more interest. And you've got people who are watching the TV each week, tuning into the pay-per-view events, going to live shows. All of those positive business metrics are up because fans feel optimistic and positive about WWE, and they really didn't, in the last few years before Vince, formally resigned.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an undeniable part of it. Again, it's just a question of how many of the WWE fan base is active on Twitter and kind of understands what's going on.
I think most of WWE's fan base was aware that Vince was no longer in charge. That was a major, major news story, and Triple H came out. Stephanie McMahon led a thank you Vince chant on SmackDown. Triple H came out on the television. Like I'm not saying every single person was, reading the Wall Street Journal article and stuff like that, but I think pretty much every fan knew that Vince was no longer in charge.
Yeah, you think like more than 90%?
More than 90? I don't know, probably not 90, but I would say like more than 80.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that. Cause we're so in the bubble that when people talk about AEW promotion, WWE, certain news and things like that, I think of like, well, how many of these people are actually, I think we assume everyone's on social. It seems like it is, but there's really not, if you look kind of the general population. But I think to your point.
Well, you have to look at Josh. You have to look at who did they lose over the last several years. Like if you look at their ratings decline, it was really heavily in 18 to 49, and that's who they've gotten back. I think the people that are the reason the ratings are up, this past year over the last several years is because I think people that had tuned out of the product over, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021 came back. And that fan base is probably more online, or more, at least on social media. I mean, pretty much everyone under the age of 50 or 60 is on social media in some regard. And
yeah, so I think there's a few things. I think it definitely has something to do with it in terms of plugged in fans for sure that felt let's say lapsed fans, to shout out to the Lapsed Fan podcast. But I think there was certainly a revived interest. I know I felt it because I'm like this for people that kind of know that that WB creative was stale, and the fact that you had the guy that a lot of people blame for that out of there. I think that certainly was like it add that element of what could happen now, and that's a big factor in terms of. I mean, Tony Khan has built part of his company on like the big announcement, the suspense, what could happen now, surprise, 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 and that's a big part of that was a big part of it. I mean, look at who is Triple H going to bring back? What are the quote unquote wrongs that he's going to right in terms of releases? And you start to see those time after time. And however,
they're all over the product now, right? All the people he brought back.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is you look at those, the people had the meme of the Thanos glove and all the, the Johnny Gargano, Bray Wyatt and all this stuff. I think if you look at that group now, it's like, what happened? I'm sure I think if you got them in a candid moment and a off the record moment, I'm sure a lot of them like, we thought this is going to be a lot different, and it has to be discouraging. They're getting paid, but there also has to be part of that where like we thought this is going to be different. It's not. You look at some people that signed like Eric Young, who never even made his, he wasn't going to be a big name and everything like that, but he never made an appearance for the company. Vince came back. He's like, I don't want to do this. And
the Lanny Poffo getting paid and never making an appearance.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a big factor in to your point, the fact that things are paid off now for the most part. The Cody non-win at WrestleMania, a big kind of side note from that. But there certainly is it feels different. The long title reigns, which I think a lot of that is done to erase the past. That's been a big WWE thing forever, is now, and who gives a shit about the past unless you're trying to sell the network. And it feels that there's fresh matchups. And I look at things like, the Royal Rumble, just talking about the men specifically. This is kind of feeling when I was growing up, when you had two wrestlers that never touched before, never went face to face. And I think you have a little bit of that still. You look at things like the Royal Rumble, and that kind of leads me to think, like, have faith in, like, there's bigger stuff, down the road they could still do. I think people would be very excited about a Gunter Brock Lesnar match, for example. Who knows where we're going to get it, but I think you have those little interactions, minglings, where it's just like, oh man, we could see this someday. There's guys, yeah, I think that there's talents there that they have really got behind, that are younger, kind of newer talents, and they've really stuck with them. And things, to your point, they've paid off. Back in the fully Vince era, I don't think Rey Mysterio would have ever gotten a win over Dominic. It would have been something that just wasn't satisfying, didn't have that moment. And you saw it happen, and everyone is better as a result of that angle and how things have gone. Everyone, I don't want to say Ray is fully elevated, but he kind of maintained his status. He got the revenge. He got that moment.
Yeah, I mean,
He
there's
was
only
had
so
that.
much. There's only so much you can elevate Rey Mysterio. He's Rey
Right,
Mysterio.
but at least he had the that baby face moment that we talked about at the top of the show. So yeah, I think the Vince being gone thing, it definitely is a major piece of that pie. And again, when I think you kind of saw some of the reaction online when it was real that he was kind of getting back into things, just this groan of just
Yeah,
like,
the
oh,
Raw
okay,
after WrestleMania.
yeah, it's like we're doing this again, and you can kind of feel his influence and stuff. And that's going to be, the big, I say the big fight. I'm really interested to see what happens when the merger happens later this year, assuming it does. Is how much, I'm sure the structure will stay the same, but what are the expectations of Vince McMahon at this point? And I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic for them. I think they're going to do fine money wise, but the more he gets involved in creative, the more we've seen, how much can the success and the wave that they're riding sustain him being back in a creative role, an influential creative role? How much can that kind of offset things? I think that's going to be a fascinating thing over the next couple of years.
Well, and the public line for WWE has been really to downplay Vince's role in WWE, especially in the creative process. Remember when he was first backstage? Oh, he was just there to see John Cena. He came up to see John Cena, like, oh, he wasn't wearing a headset. He was just, talking to people backstage. And then he was wearing a headset. It's like, oh, he wasn't really doing that much stuff. He wasn't like talking to the commentators. WWE, from a PR perspective, has kind of really downplayed Vince's role as a creative head in the company. And I think part of that is because they know that they're benefiting from the idea that Vince is not having his fingerprints all over the product again.
And you think about that with other entertainment properties throughout the world. If a famed creator contributor came back, and would there be that level of like, oh no, they're back, right? And this is outside, like, scandals and things like that, but just from a, wow, they've really lost their fastball. I mean, you think about, you mentioned like WPR doing their best to dissuade people from thinking that he's really kind of involved and back. Just think of that. This guy's been so synonymous at WWE, but he is so, like, everyone's kind of like so over him that they have to be like, no, it's not a big deal, not a big deal. Instead of being like, yeah, no shit, he's back. He's Vince McMahon. Of course he's back. He's gonna make the product better. The message is, oh, don't worry about it. He's fine. Triple H is good. He's good.
Triple H is still calling the shots.
Yeah, don't you worry.
Yeah, and I think that shows to me, like, they're aware that they're, if we talk about business being out, part of, again, that part of that is the optics, and part of that is the idea that it's the Triple H is in charge and the fans are into it. And WWE has done enough things right over the last year, like we said, fixing kind of how baby faces are presented, being consistent with the Bloodline story, paying things off more, that fans, even if there's a reason to doubt that Vince isn't totally gone, the product is at least good enough for fans to feel like the product is improved, whether or not Vince is directly involved or not, or he's only involved a little bit, or he's only giving Triple H a few notes as opposed to ripping up the script or things like that. The company has been good enough to to satisfy fans who might be feeling a little bit curious about what Vince's actual role is. And I think you mentioned something earlier when you were talking about the bloodline, which I think is really important, which is the people who are featured in the bloodline, with the exception of Paul Heyman. We're not relying on nostalgia and stars who are on a part-time basis or past their prime or things like that, which for so long, when WWE was looking to pop business, looking for someone to main event WrestleMania, they turned to your part-time nostalgia legends, whether it was someone like Brock Lesnar, who's more of a part-timer and less nostalgia, but Goldberg and The Undertaker and Triple H, and getting The Rock to come back, and Steve Austin wrestling at WrestleMania, and all of that stuff. And that was for so long kind of how WWE relied on popping business for a short period of time. And it's really notable to me that they've found a sustainable angle, and it's not relying on the past, and it's not relying on attitude era nostalgia. It's relying on wrestlers who are, I believe, all in their 30s, all very much in their physical prime, and all for the most part on the programming each week. I know Roman's kind of here and there, but it's not relying on a wrestler who got over 30 years ago to carry business. And I think that's really important, and it kind of proves a lot of previous thoughts false, that you needed to have nostalgia acts to get over. These guys are raising business more than ever, and it's being done with guys who are in their prime and not relying on nostalgia.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. There has not been the need to have a Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair here, and Roman Reigns comes out to intimidate them, or have like Shawn Michaels do another not needed DX reunion, and have Reigns and in the bloodline just kind of take them out or something. There's no need for that. It's like the cards that we have in our hand are the ones that we're going to play with. We don't need to pull off the deck again. And I think that's another like subliminal, if you want to say it, like thing where you don't have to go to John Cena. You don't have to go to a star from the past to get the heat that you may be looking for, kind of like a twist or a turn. You do it when it makes sense, and you do it like, for example, like and I keep going back to that Puerto Rico show with Backlash. When they used Savio Vega, it wasn't like a forced inclusion. The way they fed him into that whole thing, it felt natural, and the people went crazy for it. And they didn't try to embarrass him. They didn't try to do anything like that. The way they worked him in, it just worked. And yeah, they have not need to, in order to boost Roman up, they have not needed to sacrifice attitude era legends or intimidate Sergeant Slaughter. Some of these guys that the dozens that are always around these reunion shows that they do every now and again. And it's been a refreshing thing that we have not had to have a Goldberg get brought back just for the sake of doing it. And yeah, it's been a nice change, and that is to me that shows the health of an organization where you play with the cards that are in your hand. You assemble these for a reason, and you don't have to keep going outside and be like, this isn't good enough, because that just tells your talent, or at least a percentage of your talent, like, we're not good enough. They don't see us as good enough to be featured or to be mingling in this. And that's it's been kind of one of my issues with AEW is when you constantly are bringing in new talent, you don't give people kind of a chance to get to see what's in their hand, so to speak. It's like you need a real stable group so people can get to grow with them, in the maturity of a company. And that's something that WWE has really got away from. And I think that's a good thing, where when a Steve Austin comes back like he did, it fits. It's not a square peg in a round hole, okay, we're just going to do this again in a couple months.
Well, and it's way more sustainable to be able to, whether it's making your own talent or signing wrestlers or whoever, that wrestlers that are in their athletic primes that can work, once a week, is way more sustainable when those people are your biggest drawing cards, as opposed to relying on someone who's only going to wrestle a match a year. And part of that is, the Attitude Era guys really hit their physical expiration dates The Undertaker can't wrestle anymore. Triple H can't wrestle anymore. You can't rely on those guys. Having a big match a year to pop WrestleMania or something like that. You needed to find new talent, and it's so much better. And a few things is you mentioned, like, telling the current wrestlers you're not good enough. I mean, the fans, it would tell the fans themselves that, because they would all, when they brought back Bill Goldberg, or when Brock Lesnar comes out, or when The Undertaker comes out, WWE always treated those people like the biggest stars possible. And, that's a good thing, but it was a huge contrast to the current stars that they did have, who they did not present nearly as well. And it was a really negative perception to the fans, because the fans already naturally see a Bill Goldberg or a Triple H or The Undertaker as a bigger star than the current stars that exist now. So when they're presented like such big stars, it just hammers home the belief that the older guys are better, the newer guys are not as good. Wrestling used to be better. WWE used to be better. I don't really want to watch it each week now because the current product is bad. I just want to live in my nostalgia bubble. And now that you have guys that come across as, big stars and are protected as such, and are current modern wrestlers, contemporary wrestlers, that is a huge benefit.
It's interesting. We're talking about the history, or I was talking about the history, how WWE wants to kind of erase it as best they can. It's interesting that they like history when it serves them best. The nostalgia acts, and that's the way that they used to be. And like, we'll pull from the past, but when it comes to respecting the past, like, we don't need that. It's just they use the past to bolster up the current in a negative way. At least that's how they did it for a long time. And it's interesting. And I had not thought about that, how they have not kind of done that. And again, to your point, they condition a lot of fans like, the past is better. The Attitude Era is the only thing that matters.
And so many fans already think that.
Right.
Like, so many fans already have that position where, this thing I liked when I was 19 and I watched Steve Austin, give The Rock a Stone Cold Stunner. Those fans already think that. So when they're presented as such, it hammers that home. Even people that are my age, I really do not remember the Attitude Era. But people my age will be like, oh yeah, it was better when The Rock and Steve Austin were around. And I was like, well, I was 4 years old when that happened. It's not like I have childhood memories of that, but it's just been hammered home for decades that was the peak of professional wrestling. And there's 10 million podcasts and YouTube series talking about how that was the peak of professional wrestling. And everyone seems to agree on that. It just kind of hammers it home. And then when you watch the WWE product, and it's always like, focused on how great that time period was, and the wrestlers from that time period are the biggest stars on the show, it just kind of continues to really send that message home. And it becomes so much more difficult for wrestlers now to stand out. They have so much working against them.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of my eras. I'm a lot older than you are, but I mean, I was in college during that era, and it was cool because people, again, it was a pop culture thing where your hardcore wrestling fans were having fun with it, especially the Monday Night War between the two companies, WCW and WWE. But also, like, people that are watching it were like, it felt cool, it felt edgy and different. All the different superlatives that have been seen in the various WWE produced shows and all this stuff. And at this point, it's kind of talked to death. But yeah, I mean, it was fun, but there was fun in the 80s. There was fun spots in the 90s, depending on, what people, despite what people should say, or do say rather, about some of the 90s stuff. I mean, in any era, you can find pockets of stuff that meant something to you, just for the collective outside the wrestling bubble. That Attitude Era brought them in because it was different and new and fresh. And I mean, those TV numbers will never, ever, ever get back to that level of how many people were watching Raw and Nitro during the time. It was fun because you felt like it was a communal thing. You were part of something. And now every form of entertainment is struggling with a communal aspect. That way, when you do have those moments, it makes it feel better.
Our culture is totally different than it was in the late 90s.
Hugely different. Yeah.
Like, and our monoculture is dead. There's not going to be a TV show was as big as the biggest shows in like the late 90s. There's not going to be a sitcom that's going to be as ubiquitous as Seinfeld was. and so like obviously like even though and the revenues are high for wrestling, the idea of like we're not going to have 8 million people tuning into Monday Night Raw. It'd be great if there were. It'd be great for WWE if there were, but just that stuff doesn't happen on television anymore. Just our culture is more fractured and different like that. So I think some people, when they're like, oh, well, they'll never reach the heights of the Attitude Era again. And it's like, what's interesting is I was talking, this is kind of a side point, but I was talking to somebody at a live event, and they were talking about how big the Attitude Era was. And they were like, I used to be able to go to the gas station and I would see WCW merchandise being sold at the gas station. That's being mainstream. Like, that's how big it was. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then, like, next week, I was at 7-Eleven and they were selling WWE merchandise at 7-Eleven. Which is,
Yeah.
I don't use that as a barometer of what is popular or not, but I just thought that was interesting. This person had kind of put this memory up on a pedestal of how popular wrestling was. And I was like, I feel like the merchandising is more prominent now than it was, in the past. Maybe you don't see as many wrestling shirts out in public, but
Yeah. At that same gas station, the person probably had to walk in to actually pay for it, versus now you can actually just use an app, prepay for it, and you don't have to interact with anybody. Life just changes. That's the thing. Everyone's interests are so splintered now. There's, as you mentioned, there's no monoculture anymore. That, yeah, when people kind of compare those, oh, it's never going to be that way. That's a person. It's going to be hard to reach with anything. The always.
That's true. I'm never walking into gas stations unless I'm buying like a Gatorade or lottery tickets.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's everything is different. So Tony Soprano say to Paulie one day, in one of the episodes, that remember when is the lowest form of conversation. And Tony, if people remember that episode in the last season, that's not always the case. But then when people are they say it in a spirited dismissal of the current product, and it's not like it used to be. It's like, okay, what nothing is like it used to be. Everything is, from movies to TV, everything in life is different. And if you keep holding on the way things used to be, you're going to miss a lot of cool stuff. And that's, again, an unfortunate thing about this really dumb online wrestling war is with all these different people saying that the other product sucks so much, they're missing some good stuff. And you can like both companies, you can like any companies, whatever you want, but to dismiss it without watching it, I guarantee people would like stuff on the other show, and vice versa. They just have to be just like, you don't have to defend a wall. Nobody cares. Like, everyone's good. Like, just like, calm down a bit, people, calm down.
Yeah. So in terms of WWE's like growth in its fan base, like, do you think over the last year, WWE has created a lot of new fans, like people who never watched wrestling ever before have gotten into the product over the past year?
Boy, that's a tough question. I think maybe
the numbers would suggest yes, right? Like, in theory, there's a lot more people watching, so a lot of those people must be new fans.
I think saying just strictly in viewership or demo information, or both.
Both is fine.
Yeah. So I think there's, for demos, I think there's people that maybe they're kids that finally kind of came. Like, if you look at 18 to 34, I think there are some kids that may have just kind of come along and aged into that demo, and maybe that's bumping up something, just kind of hit again the cool factor and so on. I don't know if the kids are watching WWE in colleges. I doubt they're hanging around a Friday night watching SmackDown, but stranger things have happened. And I think probably along the way that there's been some stuff that's accessible, where people are watching, maybe caught stuff on YouTube or TikTok clip, or however kind of younger people connect with pop culture these days and find things, or maybe it's kind of led them down the path of, oh, I want to check this out. I mean, how much are they watching? Are they committing hours and hours and hours on end? I doubt it, but it's I mean, they'd have to create, I think, new fans along the way, especially, when they cross over in different, types of media and things like that. Who knows what kind of that connection point is? It's so hard for me to kind of understand that. But I think definitely it's probably a good amount of new fans that have been created. Because I think WWE in culture, in any type of pop culture, you're always kind of creating new fans. It just depends on how people access them. I think they've done a good job of being a pretty accessible, colorful a product that people can find, whether they don't have cable or regular TV. There's ways to find it And especially if one of their friends says, "Oh, this is awesome, you should check this out." And that's, again, I keep flipping the AEW side that I don't, and maybe we could talk about this and whatever. I think AEW just not, I don't think they make it themselves very accessible to new non-wrestling fans. I think they like to stay within a certain kind of bubble, so to speak. And I think WWE, I think just by obviously the branding and their history, and I think just the way that I think they make their game, their sport, their product rather, more accessible than the competition does, so to speak, to the extent that AEW is competition.
Yeah, I don't know if they're really creating new fans. I think the growth is coming from fans who had kind of stopped watching regularly or stopped attending live shows and coming back to the product because there's a lot more momentum behind it. Which is different than as opposed to we created a bunch of new fans. I think, especially if you look at what fans they lost over the last few years and what fans they've gained, and the fact that they're in the same demographic makes me think that, and that's different. I think a really often like kind of thing that's kind of taken for granted as the truth, but it's really not, is that whatever the average viewers are each week, which it could be Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, Collision, doesn't matter. We kind of assume that that is roughly how many of fans there are that are invested and willing to watch. There's 1.8 million fans who watch Raw each week. That's roughly how many fans are invested in watching Monday Night Raw. And that's not true at all. There's the audience is much larger than that. Just you have to convince those people, that audience, to tune in each week by offering something that is interesting for them, something that's going to make them, pause whatever plans they might have to make an appointment to sit down and be in front of the TV at 8 o'clock on Monday nights to watch Raw. And I think the product grabbing people better and grabbing fans who, despite what anyone else wants to say, fans who genuinely want to like WWE, want to like pro wrestling, have been turned away by WWE over the past several years because of different creative decisions and things like that, but genuinely want to like this thing that they grew up liking. WWE's done a better job making the weekly content more exciting and making it feel like they got to tune in each week. I think that's what the Bloodline's greatest strength is, in the sense of feels like even though the storyline is going very slow, the idea is there's going to be something new each week. Roman Reigns is going to confront this guy. There's going to be the trial of the tribal chief. There's going to be the showdown later. They do something.
Rules of engagement.
Right. There's going to be a contract signing, whatever branding you want to use for it. But you want to see each week. And that's a story people are invested in. And people are like, all right, I've got to watch SmackDown this week. And I just don't think that existed, a year or two ago. And I think that's getting people more into the product. There are other things like Peacock has, had a huge growth in subscriptions. I think they're in like twice as many homes as they were like a year or two ago when WWE first launched on Peacock. And that makes it so people who were maybe, who weren't not WWE Network subscribers, there are maybe not regular WWE TV watchers, maybe they watched WrestleMania, maybe they watched another, pay-per-view event that they saw on the streaming network while they're watching something else on Peacock. And they liked it, like you said, especially with like you mentioned the Puerto Rico show, but you can talk about like Money in the Bank in London, even WrestleMania, and some of these other shows have had really good atmospheres.
Elimination Chamber, right?
Oh yeah, Elimination Chamber, great example. What was better than that? The atmosphere of that Elimination Chamber, especially for the main event. It makes the product seem exciting, thrilling, interesting, and people who are maybe sampling it because they also happen to have a Peacock subscription and now they have access to this major pay-per-view event. They say, oh man, that was really good. Maybe I'll check out Raw next Monday if I'm around, or something like that. And that is, I think, making a big difference as well. Just having that kind of infrastructural access to the product. And that's why I think like if AEW were to get on HBO Max, it would be hugely beneficial because there are a lot more people with Max subscriptions than there are Peacock subscriptions. And that would allow the AEW pay-per-view events, which are mostly excellence, to reach a much wider audience than selling them on pay-per-view does, which obviously limits it because it's limiting you to people that you convince to spend $50 on.
Yeah. That is going to be a fascinating part of the next AEW rights deal is how Max is incorporated, because I think it has to be in some point. I'm kind of like ready for them to start getting going on some of these next developments. Like I just posted a story today, or some Tony Khan interview that he did with PW Insider, and basically he said that his quote unquote dream is that AEW content ends up on Max. I mean, we're 4 years or so into this run, and again, there's still, unless you buy the pay-per-view or had bought it in the past, there's no way to go back and watch like the very first Full Gear or the very first Revolution or All Out or things like that. Like you can't really go back and watch domestically, and we can't go back.
There's
and
no
watch.
legal way to watch. Like,
right.
I was like, oh man, Revolution 2020, that was so great, and it's like, I can't watch it because, there's no access for it, which is really absurd in 2023, given what we have access to. Like, if I wanted to watch a TV show that was really good or a movie, I'd be very easily able to watch it at any time.
And that's the thing I don't understand about why some of these things take so long. Because if this was, again, if this was a WWE, they would be this would be like they would have packaged us up already and figured, okay, we're going to do our own direct service, or these things that I don't understand why they're taking so long. And I know that this exclusive deal just happened, but they could have done this a year ago. They could have started doing some stuff on the same technology that they bought from Sinclair that they're using for Ring of Honor's streaming library, which I think was kind of a Trojan horse into thinking, can we do this? How hard is this to run it ourselves? Like this is from a fan standpoint, again, look at accessibility and so on. Like it's just, they've made it hard to kind of be like, oh, I want to go back to the beginning. And some people might do that. I don't know what extent, but there's things that when it comes to kind of like how the business is run, I don't fully understand why certain things take as long as they do. And I don't know if a monologue by Tony Khan trying to answer a question, which you don't really get the answer, I don't know if they'll actually give the answer. I thought that All In was going to be the first voyage on Max for AEW,
because they never announced how you're going to watch it for a long time.
And now they're doing back-to-back pay-per-views. We assume that have they, and I'm trying to think, has All Up been officially announced as a pay-per-view yet? I think it has, right? Or someone has reported that?
I honestly can't remember, but it would seem likely that if All In was going to be on pay-per-view, All Out would be as well. I've heard that although this was not advertised during Dynamite, which I would strongly advertise it if it was the case, that there'll be some sort of discount where you can buy both for a discounted price.
Yeah, I don't think they said that last night.
They did not say it last night. I've just heard that is an idea, and I'm saying if that is the case, I would be advertising that a ton because you'd get a lot of people buying both.
Right. Yeah, it's there's just and I think Brandon Thurston was talking about this with John. I think it was him, might have been someone else. There's just a lot of mystery around how they do things, and they kind of holds fans at arm's length, and it seems for a company that was very embracive of fans and embraced kind of like you're along with us for the ride. There's definitely been, and I think every business this happens at some point. UFC, this happened as well, where it kind of like, we don't need to tell you all this stuff anymore.
Yeah. And well, there's still a lot more transparent than WWE. To use an example, like eventually the bigger your business gets, the more closer you have to hold things to the vest, I think.
Yeah. But however, we can get some insights from the investors calls and get a little bit deeper in the number. We can talk about attendance. We can talk about,
they're a publicly traded company. So
yeah, that's a huge benefit of being able to do that. So yeah, it's just they, to me, like, you got to have a deal in place by the end of the year of some sort of streaming plan or something. And cause you're talking about Max and accessibility, like it's kind of like at this point, what is taking so long, right? It's a long time that international fans have access to stuff on AEW Plus. It's just, it's strange. It's strange to me. And I don't know if it's strange on AEW's part, David Zaslav's part, or somewhere in between. I'm not really sure.
To talk back on WWE, I wanted to bring up this kind of last point in terms of like this current period and what sustainability looks like for them. I feel like the Bloodline Angle is probably going to keep going And I don't really see a reason for why it would start to cool off over the next few months if they do keep it going. But in the long run, if we acknowledge that, it's the Bloodline Angle that is really carrying things at the moment, certainly on SmackDown. I would say on SmackDown, it definitely is, because it takes up about an hour of SmackDown each week. And SmackDown ratings are very good. So clearly it's hard to argue that it's something else on SmackDown. But what comes next? What comes in the future for WWE? My questions for them are still, I have one question, perhaps one semi-answer. My first question is, I don't really like their talent evaluation ability. I really have never liked it. And I'm not sure who on WWE that's like under the age of 30, especially on the male side, really stands out to me as a future top star, someone that can be built around the way that they built around Roman Reigns, or they're built around Cody Rhodes or Sami Zayn or someone like that. And so that would be like, if we're looking at sustainability long term, where is that next generation of stars coming from? But part of me also thinks that maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they are so hot right now and they have so much credibility with their fan base that they can kind of push anyone in the way that they are able to present wrestlers, that anyone can kind of get over to a degree. And that even if someone is flawed from a performance standpoint, they can still turn into a big star if kind of the way they're presented is correct. I think like Dominic Mysterio is like a big example of this. I think Dominic is really, really untalented, but he's been presented in a way that, despite the fact that he can't really talk and he certainly can't wrestle very well, and he doesn't have a good body, he doesn't have a ton of charisma, he has turned into a positive business moving asset for WWE. And all of that comes down to his presentation and fans buying into his character. And can they continue to do that even if they don't necessarily have the most talented roster of performers?
So, yeah, this is where at some point, kind of take a step back. So when Roman was the only champion, again, your upward motion again is he's kind of like focused on this bloodline thing for so long, it kind of affected that ability for other guys to focus on the men, is kind of stunted that upward growth in terms of the goal of wrestling in kind of our minds, and comes to characters, is I want to be the champion. And so the fact that they focus so much on the secondary titles, I think has been a big benefit, especially with the Intercontinental title. But one of the things that they have to do is, in kind of like how you make more stars, you have to create more of these pursuit stories and championship stories and so on and so forth, and find these these reasons for people to get into this conflict with another man in the squared circle. So, with Reigns at some point, and this is going, the storyline is going to reach its max, and he's going to have to lose the title. It could be against Jey Uso. I think that's a possibility. But you don't want to oversell where it's, and I thought that point was going to be with Cody. You have to kind of decide, okay, who's going to be the next guy up, the next pursuer. I think, with Rollins and the World Heavyweight title, I think we're a ways away from that really having a level of meaning that is that people actually care about. Like, this is a title we want to focus on, and so on and so forth. I mean, that Roman Reigns, to beat him, that's like that's your apex mountain right there. So in some of these other stories, it's just a question of interesting storylines and actually creative and so on, being like, these are people that think about long-term planning, like we think we can elevate in a year. Like, where do they, if you would ask Triple H, what scene do you see Dominic Mysterio in a year from now? He's not going to say this publicly, but do they think they want him in the world title scene in a year? Is it a heel or a babyface? Where does Seth Rollins fit in a year from now? Kind of at the same level. Gunter, do you want, is his world title approach coming? Do you want to build to something big with him? If so, how do you get there? It's that long-term planning that's going to help really kind of, again, pay off some of these things along the way, where you can look back like, oh, here's the breadcrumb trail of where we're kind of looking. And that's the stuff that I think make fans feel good, is they invest the time and is actually worth it along the way. With Cody, I think paying that off at some point would be great. I don't know if it's going to be, say, at WrestleMania next year or something like that, but there's it with these top guys and the top pursuits, it just depends on really like where do they think the biggest payoffs are, and what do they want them to be. I have faith that they have more long-term planning than they did before, but also with the creative hope is that you don't overstay the welcome. I know, your thoughts about the Bloodline story, hold those off to the side, but like there's a point where people are going to be like, even the most ardent fans are going to be like, okay, like we're good. Like I need some sort of variance here. I need Roman to be in a feud with somebody else, or the Usos to kind of move on to something else. I don't know when that's going to be, but that's having them not overstay their welcome on this angle is going to be key. I think they've done a pretty good job with it. I mean, the numbers are I think proving that out. But again, we talked about this whole show about the cards and the, kind of up and down the roster, paying some things off and so on. I think it's just finding interesting things and stuff that is going to provide that everything for everyone approach. And how do they, how far can they sustain this is really going to depend on their desire to continue to do interesting stuff, take chances, and again, kind of find those hot crowds and just keep things going. Because again, it's going to dip at some point. They have to be ready to make the choice and do it. Be the go back to New England thing, the Bill Belichick approach of used to be where you cut a guy a year early, you don't cut him a year late. They have to be ready to cut something early and then be ready for the future. So it's not like you finally have Cody win, but if it's already on the downturn, it doesn't have that same effect as when you're kind of at the top.
Yeah, and you never really know. Like if it was up to me, I would have ended the Bloodline storyline like 2 years ago. And that would be really that would be really foolish, right? From a business perspective. The length of it has kept it has kind of it's built up so much momentum now that its length is a huge part of the story. And I know, like, if the idea is like, okay, we got to find the new Bloodline feud, where is that going to come from? That's going to be an interesting question to ask. I think, a huge reason the Bloodline feud works because Roman Reigns is this really compelling character in the sense of he was pushed for years and years and years as a top guy, never quite took off, was met with a lot of resistance from the fans, and kind of used that as motivation in doing a heel turn. Kind of selling this character where he's secretly very insecure because he knows deep down he's kind of a failure, which has kind of ebbed and flowed as far as how much they paid attention to that over the course of the Bloodline. It was very evident, early when he had the Hell in a Cell match against the Uso and things like that. Has been less prevalent as of late, but Roman, you can't just redo the Bloodline because Roman Reigns is a character that had like 10 years worth of booking investment put into him. You're not just going to have that another person's in a similar position on that roster. So you can't really recreate the Bloodline, but can you find other angles, new ideas, in characters that the fans are going to gravitate towards and respond to? That's a big question, but I also think that they have so much positive momentum right now with their own fans that it becomes so much easier to get stuff over, which is really the goal, right? Fans are trusting of the product again. So fans are, now you start teasing an angle and fans start kind of getting interested in it. It doesn't necessarily have to be literature for the ages. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 3 or 4 year storyline. But when you have that kind of credibility with your own fan base, which WWE has largely regained, it opens up a lot more opportunities.
Yeah, it's listening to the fans and trying to stay ahead of the trends and just kind of listen. I think that's a big thing. And so many fans for so long felt like they weren't being heard. And I think now they kind of, I would expect, at least I'd say over the last year, they feel they're being heard more often. And I'm sure there's some examples, I'm sure, that people are like, I don't know if that's the case or not, but it's, I think, yeah, it's just listening to your audience, because they're going to tell you where to go. And you have to be willing to say, we need to make a pivot here. And that forever, for the Vince McMahon era, there was no pivots for the most part. It was steamroll ahead no matter what. We know what's best. And sometimes your fans actually kind of know what's best. I know it's really hard for people to the top to hear that, but that's how companies really grow and stay. And again, go back to the Attitude Era. They're listening to fans because their fans were eating up no matter what Austin and McMahon were doing. They just kept feeding that train, and they got away from that. And the past year, we talked about a lot is they've got back. It seems to like, we give a shit what the fans think. And that's a feeling that it feels like the time is invested and you feel part of it, even though you're really not part of the decision-making,
Yeah, I mean, WWE had a whole era where they really openly had disdain for their own fan base. They would mock fans who were
Yeah.
too invested in the product. They would.
Can you imagine that? Isn't that the craziest thing?
You would have
Like,
Michael Cole saying
weird
they're
instinct.
Michael Cole having to say that they're in Bizarro World anytime the fans, cheered who they wanted to cheer and boo who they
In
wanted to
Toronto,
boo.
yeah.
Yeah, it started in Toronto, but Bizarro World was a rapidly growing market. It suddenly spanned, the entire Northeast at one point, and into Chicago. But you had Triple H doing me and my friend Mark aren't going to watch any more promo. All of this stuff, and for a long time, they dedicated a ton of time to like the company itself being a heel, the WWE, the authority, the company itself was a heel. I always thought it was alarming anytime someone would come up into WWE and they would cut a promo being like, I'm gonna change everything about this place, and like fans would all cheer like that person was a big baby face. And it's like, if you were a fan of something and someone said, I'm gonna change everything about this place, would that person be a heel because they're changing things of this thing that you like? But the fan, they had positioned the company and the authority within the company as heels both in storyline and in real life. And it was so negative for like getting people over and treating the fans better. And they're in a much better place now. And I think that's really ultimately what leads to this growth, is getting that trust back.
Yeah. It's an underrated part of the story is fans actually feeling respected and cared about. And I think that's
and when you do that, they tune in more and they come back to live events and they'll pay more for your product. It's amazing.
You got it.
Seems simple, seems like pretty basic customer service, Josh, but not just WWE, and many, many different outlets in wrestling history that has eluded them.
Yeah. Companies in general. I thought this was going to be one of the benefits of social media, and Twitter, especially in the early days, where brands could actually know what their customers were talking about, thinking about, and they could address complaints. It felt like a real fresh thing. And then everyone started complaining, and then they're like, this isn't so great anymore. We're going to go back to ignoring people.
Yeah, well, your feelings get hurt.
Very true. Yeah.
All right, Josh, you got anything you want to plug?
Well, is there anything else? Well, I mean, we've talked for a while. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, AEW wise, or anything else going on? I know you talk a lot on WrestleNomics every Sunday, and on this podcast. Anything else that's got your mind?
I got any quick fire topics I want to do? Let me think. I'm trying to think what I've been thinking about the last few days. I'll say I think I said this on WrestleNomics, and it improved a little bit on Wednesday, but I still think there's a lot lacking. For the fact that they sold 80,000 tickets, or are going to be around 80,000 tickets distributed to this Wembley Stadium show for AEW, I think it's been like really poorly promoted, in the sense of we're only a few weeks away. We finally got our main event on Dynamite. Was announced, Adam Cole versus MJF, which I think is going to be a big match. So that's good. But I do feel like this was a real opportunity for AEW to hammer home that this is going to be the biggest wrestling event in like the history of pro wrestling, and that every single wrestler should be vying to try to get on this card. The wrestlers themselves should be talking about it the way MJF and Adam Cole talked about it, the way they talked about like this historic event. They just want to have the greatest match ever on, because it's going to be the biggest event in wrestling history, and kind of really hammer home how important the event is. I think it's something WWE has historically done extremely well, especially regarding WrestleMania, where people talk about WrestleMania for the 3 months leading up to WrestleMania every year, and it really sets WrestleMania apart as this major event. And I feel like AEW has the perfect opportunity to do that, because they are going to have a gigantic, incredible sized crowd, and I'm sure the visuals are going to be spectacular, and just the sea of people watching professional wrestling at Wembley Stadium. And they haven't really seized that kind of level of promotion. And I'm sure the show will be good. I'm sure the show will be entertaining. I'm sure when we get there, it will be satisfying, but I'm concerned that they haven't fully capitalized on the opportunity to really brand All In as a signature event and really sell this as a historic moment that you absolutely have to be a part of if you're a wrestling fan.
Yeah, I would agree. And actually that's got me thinking throughout the week. Just kind of like, it goes back to my comment earlier about not making things accessible to new fans. It feels like they are content when it comes to announcing for shows. And I don't necessarily know if this is right or wrong. And I think the fretting it sometimes with people like, oh, the pay-per-view hasn't come together until like the last week or 10 days. AEW fans, I would say for the most part, they're going to buy the show when it's announced, because there's only 5 pay-per-views a year right now. They're like, we know it's going to be good quality and we're in. Like there's no wiggle room unless for some reason they can't watch it. I think that's why those numbers have been very consistent. The numbers that have been reported by Dave and Brandon and other people, that generally, they fall within a certain range. I think that that's good. But the one thing is you don't see them increasing. You don't see them continually going up 10,000, 20,000 per show like they were, say, with, Punk and so on, when he was first in. And again, there's a few weeks to go. It's kind of like, what are you waiting for? What is the drawback of putting this stuff out there a month or even maybe 6 weeks in advance, or really making it an integral part of your show outside a scroller in a quick ad read during it. I mean, yeah, it's August 3rd and we have one match. I'm sure things will come together quickly, but sometimes when things come together so quickly, you don't have the angles don't have time to really kind of marinate of just like, oh, we're going to see this because of all these different things that have happened, really kind of hit those go home shows to really kind of drive things home for the 850,000 people or so that they're watching Dynamite. Those conversions, like, you want those people to be, I'd be like, why are more of these people not watching? What are we not doing to convert them? And I think that's like a big question. I think there is some of that where they don't on-ramp people the right way in terms of getting them to really build that fever pitch of, I need to see this. And and a part of me wonders if they care. Right. And I say that, and obviously they want to grow revenue and all that. And that's a big part, but I just think they're so focused on like the TV stuff and they have their achievement already just by the fan base in there. You want to deliver a good show, but I think those fans are going to be happy no matter what. I wonder if that type of thinking exists of like, we can have the whole card released 7 days before. It doesn't matter because the people are there and people are going to watch. We have them. So we're just going to kind of slow play this because we have to figure out 2 straight weeks of pay-per-views, which is it's also just kind of the schedule. I'd love to get Truth Serum and Tony be like, how this come together. It just happened to be the date, because I don't think it was a strategy to put back-to-back weekends in there of pay-per-views. I think that's a kind of a tough ask, but again, it's you're right. They have not made it. They've made a big deal of it to our bubble, like we know about it. But in terms of getting the outside fan back, this is going to be a spectacle you cannot miss. They haven't done that yet, and it's surprising. Well, this is their first shot at really doing this.
They are doing a lot of media this week in Wembley State, in London, locally. I know Jeff Jarrett was there. I know Paul White has been over in London doing media for it.
Paul White and Jeff Jarrett. I mean,
well, Paul White is a hugely well-known wrestler, though.
Yes,
so
I agree. Yeah.
His value really to AEW. I know he's not like on the product all the time, but his value to AEW is he can pop on talk shows and local events and talk about, we're coming to London. This is going to be at Wembley Stadium. Like, obviously, and people know who he is. He's probably one of the, I don't know, if you consider him an active wrestler, he's probably one of the 5 to 10 most famous wrestlers in the world. in terms of just people being able to recognize him. They might not know his name.
One of the really,
They
huh?
might not
That's
know
an
his.
interesting list.
Well, I'm talking about like I'm not saying would draw a ton of money, but just as far as like I think way more people would know who the Big Show is than like Seth Rollins, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm just talking about like and like I think like people who aren't even wrestling fans know who like the Big Show is. Um because he's he's the Big Show, he's a gigantic man. But that's neither here nor there. I think my issue with All In is not even that we don't have like a whole card of matches announced. It probably would be better if they did. But that's not, I think like their style for AEW's promotion of its pay-per-view events is often like, we're going to announce a lot of the matches like the last, in the Dynamite before, and then so do a quick build kind of while it's fresh in everyone's mind. Which you can debate is whether that's successful or unsuccessful. There's probably merits, strengths and weaknesses to it. But my issue is like really we're a few weeks away and we don't really have like a creative direction for a lot of these guys. Like who is Kenny Omega going to wrestle at Wembley Stadium, or the Young Bucks or the Elite? Are they going to have a match? Who's CM Punk going to wrestle at Wembley Stadium? Who's Chris Jericho wrestling at Wembley Stadium? Maybe something involving, Daniel Garcia or Sammy Guevara. We don't know. We don't have those clear directions because oftentimes with AEW pay-per-views, even if we only get the matches formally announced, a few days before the event, we basically know what's going to happen on the show. It's just a matter of time of them getting to the storyline point where they're actually going to announce the match. But people who are watching the weekly product can see where this is headed. And that just isn't the case with All In. It just seems like we don't have clear directions for a lot of these guys, and the clock is a ticking. We've got 3 or 4 more shows to go. It's going to be, I think, really interesting to see how hard they're able to promote this.
Yeah.
And it's absurd to say it's a poorly promoted show when you look at the business it's done. I just think they haven't capitalized on an opportunity to brand All In as the biggest show of the year and have this be an annual event. Draw 80,000 fans every year instead of just this one.
Yeah, I don't think they think it's the biggest event of the year. I think and that may sound crazy to say. I don't think that
they haven't
think
acted like
that.
it is.
Like no, they haven't. Yeah. I mean, Tony Khan has said it's going to be the best show in their history, but
Tony Khan said it's going to be the biggest wrestling event in history on Wednesday night, which some people will be like, oh, yeah, that's not the biggest wrestling event in history. But I'm like, good. The promoter should be saying this show is going to be the biggest event in history. And it's not without credibility. They're probably going to end up with, the largest paid audience or in history. So it's not like a crazy, there's some validity to it, but he's a promoter. He should be making it seem like this is going to be bigger than any WrestleMania ever. It's going to be bigger than any AEW event in history, any WCW event. It's going to be 80,000 plus fans at Wembley Stadium for their UK debut. It should be treated like that.
Yeah. I wonder. Yeah. I mean, to your point, it's not out there it should be like, because you're going to see X versus X and X versus X. I think we're going to get a second match announced by Collision, whether it's a FTR challenge of the Young Bucks if they want to do a big match there, if it's something to do with the Punk Starks thing, or I think we're going to get at least one more out of this weekend. But I mean, we have to have, I think it's got to be substantial work done here in the next weeks in terms of let's get some stuff to people to look forward to, and how it fits, how it flows into All Out is fascinating as well. I think
that's actually, I think that's like, I think that's really going to be interesting to watch. I think they could have the opportunity to do some really cool stuff. I mean, the scheduling is probably less than ideal. Like you said, like, I don't really know if that would be why they chose to do pay-per-views at back-to-back weeks, but it will be a very interesting experiment to see how that is juggled. What happens on All In that will bleed into All Out? Will it kind of be this seamless transition between the two shows? Can you do a major angle at All In and then run it back at All Out like a week later? How will that impact business? I think all that's very fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to play into the MJF Cole thing. Whether Cole does a turn at All In that leads to All Out, if MJF does, I think they're going to go back to back with matches between those guys with some sort of, the hook is going to be whatever happens at All In, and then the full payoff maybe at All Out or something. I think there's something there, but yeah, you have a lot of that, and that allows them to be like, look, our build to All Out was this pay-per-view we did 7 days prior, and yeah, we'll see how that turns out. But it's yeah, I a month from now,
This
maybe a month
Tuesday
from
in
now.
this Tuesday in Texas.
That's right. Yeah, a month from now, where that'll be really interesting to kind of look back on if they were able to land the plane or not. We'll see.
Yeah. All right, Josh. I really want to thank you for coming on the show today. Is there anything? Did you already plug your stuff, or dude?
No, I kicked over you for more questions. Yeah. So I'm a contributor for WrestlingObserver.com. You can check us out, obviously. You know that.
I think my
And
listeners are familiar with the Wrestling Observer.
I'd say so. I would say so. And you can check me out at do a podcast for them, Josh Nason's Punch Out. And I do that a couple times a month with interesting guests and so on. The last person I talked to was Ben Goldstein, who is the former editor-in-chief of Cage Potato, which was an MMA website that was really kind of a big deal, kind of more of a humor-based take on MMA back in the boom period of 2005, 2006, and so on and so forth. And Ben just recently came off a run on Jeopardy as a 5-time champion. And I was fascinated by that story. I read a book about Jeopardy last year, which I thought was really fascinating. And
did you read Claire McNear's book?
That was the book. That was the book. Yeah. So I'm not like a huge Jeopardy fan, but I was very kind of interested in how everything works. So yeah, Ben and I talked for an hour. So that's available for free on the website. And yeah, just kind of interesting conversations about things that we kind of take for granted in the pro wrestling space, institutions and so on and so forth that exist, and kind of getting in the weeds a little bit. Indie promoters, how things are going, former personalities that have not out, so things like that, which are kind of just part of the. There's a lot of choices in people's podcast days, right? I mean, so I want to do something that's a little bit different, not just a recap of Dynamite or Raw or something like that. I want to do something that's a little bit different.
Yeah, no, and I have been a guest couple times on the show. Yeah,
yes.
I know. I was thinking that this. I'm like, this is Josh's first appearance on my show, and that's a bad job on mine, because you've been very courteous with your platform. Welcome me onto your show several times, and I know there's been plenty of people on the Voice of Wrestling Network that have also appeared on Josh Nason's Punch Out before in the past. So there's a lot of crossover appeal between the two brands. We're gonna have a Survivor Series match this November. My biggest fear, I watch Jeopardy pretty regularly, and I'm pretty good at trivia. But I always have the fear of Jeopardy. Like I would never be able I'd be way too nervous. I would blow it very quickly. My big fear is it's going to be like the final Jeopardy question is going to be like professional wrestling or something. It's going to be the category, and I'm just going to totally choke. And it would be like embarrassing, because people at home would be like, "Oh, Jesse's going to nail this question," and it's like really easy, and I just blow it because I'm too nervous.
Exactly. Yeah. That's your scarlet letter for the rest of your professional life. Yeah,
it's going to be like,
yeah.
who spotty slammed Andre the Giant in front of WrestleMania 3, which like would be maybe like a real Jeopardy question that they would ask, and I would somehow manage to get it wrong. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Josh. Thanks a lot, everyone who's been listening, and I'll talk to everyone again in a while.